Hi, my name is Morgan Byrne, and I am the director of the Center for Excellence in Teaching and Learning. In this short video, we're going to be talking about teaching community college students. There are a couple things that we need to get through, so I do want to go ahead and flip to our agenda for this session, which includes the following. Now, please don't feel daunted by all of this. If you've taught at a different institution of higher learning before, it is very likely those skills will transfer. So you're not starting from the very foundations, right? You do already have that background, but let's say hypothetically you've never taught at either the community college level or the university level. Maybe teaching at the collegiate level is entirely new to you. This is just meant to give you some additional information so that you know what to expect as you navigate a community college classroom. Now, we're going to start by talking about demographics. That will begin with broad demographics we're recording this video in 2026. April of 2026. I was about to say May. It's April of 2026. So in February of 26, the American Association of Community Colleges released their fact sheet for their demographics. So that was about 2 months ago. We're going to be using those demos here. We'll also talk about blended classrooms, common intellectual experiences, not to be confused with the high impact practice, more on that later, varying needs of these different groups, how you build community amongst very different groups of students, and then workforce readiness. One of the things that is stressed most often to community colleges and universities too. I don't want it to sound like it doesn't apply to them, but when it comes to community colleges, the biggest focus, or at least one of the biggest focuses, is career and workforce readiness. Anything that they are learning in that community college needs to be transferable to the workforce. So we're going to talk about each of these elements. So we're going to start again with those demographics. So according to the American Association of Community Colleges, in Community College Daily, if you've never read anything about community colleges, if this is totally new to you, highly recommend Community College Daily. You can find them just by searching their title on Google. Now, they do have a journal. That is something that we can pay access to. We do not as of right now. I would like to in the future, but you can read a bunch of, if not most of, their articles online. They're super helpful. And we are looking specifically at the AACC Fast Facts 2025. So obviously we don't have 26 yet. The year has not yet concluded, so we're working with last year's data. Number one, 39% of all U.S. undergraduates are community college students. I personally was super surprised to read that. Mount West, if you've been on campus before, you've noted that as of right now, aside from our satellite campuses like Culinary Arts, we are a small campus. We are a single building and everybody is housed here. As of recording this video, our student base is a little over 2,000 students, and frequently when I attend conferences, I'm speaking with people from community colleges that are within larger state systems where they've got tens of thousands of students. So we're pretty small, and sometimes that skews the way that I look at our student base in terms of how many students must be community college students compared to university students. But no, 39, almost 40% of undergraduates are community college students, which I think is super cool. 49% of Hispanic college and university students attend community colleges. 53% of Native American undergraduates attend public two-year colleges, and 39% of Black and 34% of Asian and Pacific Islander undergrads attend public two-year colleges. So we are looking at very different demographics, which I think is super exciting, right? We are seeing a rise in community colleges. That's always awesome, not just for us as an institution, right? But because community colleges have a lot to offer. Think about a lot of the talking points you've probably heard over the last few years. Things like smaller class sizes, more one-to-one time with your instructors, being able to feel as if you are directly impacting the community, because that ultimately is what a community college is for. It helps to create workers that serve within that community. So seeing these statistics, seeing that almost 40% of U.S. undergrads are in community colleges is super exciting. Now, how do we take this and apply it to Mount West? Well, at Mount West, we're going to get a little bit more granular and talk about the types of students that you might encounter as an instructor here at Mount West. The first of which is first-time freshmen, not to be confused with that second category, dual enrollment. There is a difference. A first-time freshman is somebody who's fresh out of college, or fresh out of high school, rather, sorry, and they are entering college for the first time. That's most common, right? Or they are first-time freshmen, just kind of haven't been to college before. Let's say that they took a 1, 2, 3 year gap after high school. They would still count as first-time freshmen. So anybody setting foot on a college campus for the first time. We have a not insignificant amount of first-time freshmen. Now, as you're looking at these categories, I do want to stress, these are not all, even though 1 and 2 are separate. That does not mean they are all their own individual sections. We will see some Venn diagram overlap in some of these cases. Now, a dual enrollment student means a student that is enrolled in 2 places, right? We've got the high schools, and then we have here at Mount West. So the Jumpstart program, which you've likely heard about already, is our dual enrollment program, and we work with several of the surrounding high schools all the way out to Tulsa. So we do actually have some pull almost an hour away, which is really exciting, and those students get bussed in to Mount West's campus to attend college level courses. And when they are in those courses, they are effectively just Mount West students. They have the same materials, they have the same set expectations, etc. But they're not quite first-time freshmen yet because they are still high school students. Next, we have returning students. Returning students are sometimes referred to as non-traditional students as well, typically because when someone thinks student, they're thinking in college somebody who's between 19 to 22 years old. But a returning student might be in their 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s. I've taught in classrooms where I am in the minority in terms of age. Half the class has been older than me. So you might encounter that depending on your age, your experience here at Mount West. So we have our returning students, and again, not an insignificant amount of students at Mount West are returning students. And then finally, first generation students. You might have a dual enrollment student who is first gen. You might have a first-time freshman or a returning student who is first gen. A first gen student is someone who is the first in their family, so first generation in their family, to attend college. Mount West is very supportive of first generation students. Our student services team actually has a first generation luncheon for first gen students, gives them t-shirts and all kinds of stuff once a semester, and make sure that they have the support and the resources that they need. So these are some of the big demographics that you're going to encounter while you are working here at Mount West Community and Technical College. Now, when it comes to our demographics, right? Students will be coming to your classroom from different backgrounds. If we're looking at somebody who is a first gen student, it is entirely possible they're going to knock it out of the park. In my experience, they tend to. They are ready, they are completely and totally prepared to learn, but there are also plenty of cases where you're going to have somebody coming to college and they don't really know what to expect yet. Or maybe you're working with a high schooler. They might be a junior or a senior, and they're really nervous, and maybe there are some gaps in their knowledge. You will need to work with them. You've got students coming from different backgrounds, and part of the key to being a successful instructor at a community college is being able to oscillate between those different demographics. What does each student need? So we want to make sure that everybody is getting the resources and communication that they deserve as a student here at Mount West. So you just need to be prepared that not everyone is going to be coming from the same background or the same experiences, so your approach is going to need to be a little varied. In thinking about that, one thing that you can establish fairly readily is a common intellectual experience, or stress these common intellectual experiences with your students. So we've got a couple different categories that you will see here on the screen. The first of which, in the upper right, is work experience. And it says, you will likely have students with experience working a part or full-time job. Try to leverage that. So let's say that you've got a classroom that has some Jumpstart students who might have jobs. I find the dual enrollment students that we work with do also have part-time jobs at restaurants typically, but also some retail. But you might also have returning students or first-time freshmen that have full-time jobs, that are adults that have been on the job for a while. the more you can do to leverage that, the better. And we'll talk a little bit more about this as we get into outcomes and career readiness. But if a student is noting their experience in the workplace and connecting it directly to what everyone else is learning, that's excellent. That is also indicative of moving towards, high impact practices, active learning, things of that nature, making sure to connect what's going on in the classroom with what's happening outside of it. Also, too, one thing we'll focus on is community building. We might have somebody who's worked as a welder for 20 years, and then you might have a high schooler who's been working at Wendy's for 6 months. It might seem on its surface that the two don't have much in common, but realistically, I bet they do. They know how to meet expectations. They might know what it's like to go through a work training. There are certain kinds of communication that they know they have to maintain, and being able to leverage that to get them talking helps to kind of establish we're from different backgrounds, but maybe we're not too different after all, even though we're different in age. Or development experience. This is one that I like to focus on. So we were all a child once. When discussing learning, try to touch on it in a perspective all will understand. So when I am talking about learning a new skill, and for reference, I'm an English professor, so that's my background. I have a creative background specifically. So when I am talking about narrative writing in my first module with my students, I'm always stressing that there's no such thing as bad writing. A rough draft is just that. It's a draft. It's not your final draft. No big deal. Be messy on the page. Do what you need to do. That's how you handle it. And one thing that I always use as an example is I ask my students, all of them, regardless of age, regardless of background, do you remember when you were a kid and you had to make a grilled cheese sandwich for the first time? And then my follow-up question is, how did that go? And usually the answer, regardless of age, is, it didn't go so well, because you were learning. It's a new skill. And so I talk about, okay, as we're approaching this, I want you to look at it the way that you looked at learning a skill when you were a kid, when you were in high school, whenever you were first learning to pick up a hobby that you now really like. Because even though you might have some students that are in their 40s and some that are in their their teens, their 20s, they know what it's like to learn a new skill. So talking about their development experience, so as they learned new skills, as they developed, as they got older, that can kind of help to establish, again, we're all human, and even though we might have different learning styles, we've all been in the same place before, where we're confronted with something new, and we've had to get over that obstacle. And then you use whatever they use to get over that obstacle and compare that to what's going on in your class. And then finally, learning experience. If you are teaching a course that requires a prerequisite, those students are on the same path. Use that to create a baseline for understanding. For example, when I teach English 102, the prerequisite for which is English 101, I do not go over databases in depth a second time. I am operating under the assumption that, well, you got it in English 101. And I always have recordings in my Blackboard course shells, so on the off chance somebody didn't get the information that they needed, they can go into Blackboard to get it, but I don't use class time for it, because there's an assumption you all had this learning experience already. And what that does is, one, establish a baseline, right? We're all in the same boat. But two, it opens up the opportunity for them to talk about their previous learning experience, and to, if we need to, fudge or move that baseline a little bit. If there are gaps that are consistent across everyone's learning experience, that means I can't just put things off to the side and say, go watch the recording. I need to address it in class. So it helps me, but it also helps the students feel like they are on the same page, which is nice. And again, that's got nothing to do with the fact that some are first gen, and some are dual enrollment, and some are first-time freshmen or returning students, because it's all about learning. It's got nothing to do with the fact that some are older than others. Now, when we're looking at our classrooms, like I mentioned, we have our dual enrollment program with Jumpstart. What it does is it invites these students to be part of our courses. They still have pathways. They have gen ed courses they have to take, just like all of our other students. And the team strives to create blended classrooms. A blended classroom is your ideal classroom, both at a community college or in a university, where you've got students from various backgrounds. It's not homogenous. It's not just one group and that's it. However, I do want to note that sometimes, for example, at the time of recording this, Tulsa High School only comes, I think, twice a week. So a lot of those students have to be funneled into the same classes. There were 2 classes that I taught last semester that were all high school students. That might happen. You might have a class that is all high school students, which means you course correct. You change a little bit of how you approach things just because different students need different things. But you usually will have a classroom that has your teenagers, your high school students, and then also students in their 30s, their 40s, etc. So we do strive for those blended classrooms. But it does mean as you approach these classes, you're going to have students with varying needs. And I think that's exciting. It's a fun challenge as an instructor, but it also means too, as long as you're meeting all of those needs for those students, you're really fostering a great community. One thing we want to stress too is a common intellectual experience. So in this case, I'm not talking about a high impact practice. Here, I more so mean establishing a norm between everyone in the classroom. So let me elaborate a little bit more on what that means. So when we ask questions, like the questions that are available here on your screen, you are able to establish, and I keep talking about baselines, but that's a really nice way to build community and make sure your class is on the same page if everyone understands expectations of where they're supposed to be and why. So if you want to stress that all of you guys, you're coming from the same space intellectually in terms of the course material, if it's new or if they're in a course that required a prerequisite, so they should have this information already, questions like this can help to emphasize that they have things in common. Like, how familiar is everyone with this subject matter? It's entirely possible, if it's not a course that requires a prerequisite, that they're not super familiar with it. If that is the case, what I do, for example, in English 101, when I introduce the term rhetorical situation, I ask, what does this word mean to you guys? And typically I get either blank stares or a panicked expression. Like, I don't know what that is. And I'm worried that you're going to call on me to explain what that is in front of the class. I do not do that. It's part of my pedagogy to not call on students. It made me anxious as a student, so I refuse to do it to students in my own classes. But I do kind of get a feel for, all right, what do we know? What do we not know? The faces will tell you a lot, honestly. But if they start saying, actually, I have no idea what that is, and then other people start to feel a little bit more familiar, or comfortable, rather, to speak their mind, then we're having a common experience. That way we're able to build community a little bit better, and we're kind of bridging those gaps between our different demographics. What are your previous experiences with this content? That's a really good one for those courses that do require a prerequisite. What are your previous experiences learning X, Y, and Z? What have you remembered from X, Y, and Z? Again, we're setting expectations, but we're also giving everybody an opportunity to answer a question that any of them can answer. It's not just for one group. Or, what lingering questions do you have about the topic? Again, geared towards the entire class. You are all supposed to be on the same page. If you're not, that's something I need to help with. So let me do that thing for you. That way, nothing is geared toward one specific group and is instead about making sure you are bringing everybody together to see that they're all on the same page. Now, I mentioned varying needs. This is super important because, again, not everybody is going to come to you with the same level of collegiate experience. Some students will have none. And I love working with first-time freshmen. I love working with first-generation students. I think everybody here does. Rather, I know everyone here does. Including student services. Again, they do a lot for those students. But it does mean they might need a little bit of extra assistance. So here are some things I want you to keep in mind as you approach your courses. Number one, as an instructor, you're available in a variety of ways. If we're talking about communication, you've got your email, you have your office phone, you have your physical office. During your student hours, hopefully your door is open. Or if you have to close your door for any reason, let's say that you're like me, doing a recording right now for something. I have a little whiteboard on my door so that if I am in my office and I am working and I need that door shut, but I'm still available if someone has a question, I write on my whiteboard, hey, I'm recording, please just wave into the window if you need anything. So if a student needs something, or a colleague, they can just wave at my window that I leave unobscured, and they can, come in after I've paused the recording. No big deal. So there are lots of different ways that the students can communicate with you. you will want to be aware that some of them will prefer other things, or rather different things than others. Some will prefer email. I always preferred email as a student. I've had some students that prefer to talk on the phone. You will have students who have more experience talking on the phone than they do with working with their email. Be prepared for that. Some students will prefer to meet with you in person. Some students either won't come to campus at all because they are fully remote students, or maybe when they're not in your classroom or their other professors' classrooms, they have to be at work. In that case, they might want to do a Zoom call with you. It's good to be flexible. There are lots of different channels for communications. Not every student is going to want to do the same thing. You need to be prepared to handle different modes of communication. I do want to stress too, and this is in every single syllabus because it's in our syllabus template, that when it comes to communication via email, faculty are expected to respond to students within 48 hours at most. So that's where you get your weekend, right? So you're not expected to respond on the weekends. And I do heavily encourage you to address that with students. My first day of class, I always explain, I am available 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. Monday through Friday. You need something via email, I am there. I am not there after 5 p.m. on Friday. So definitely set that up early in the class period or early in the semester. But you need to be prepared to have different channels of communication and to maintain those with your students. Number 2, resources are incredibly important, but not every student's going to need the same resource. Some students don't need any help as they move through a course, but that won't be the case for everyone. As you design supplemental resources like study guides or recordings, consider your students' experiences. What would best help all of them? Can your existing resources be modified to fit the whole group? I would also encourage you to think about accessibility as you put together your resources. So for example, when I first started teaching, I would make some kind of document, and very often it would get uploaded to my Blackboard as a PDF. We know in 2026 that we do not put PDFs in Blackboard for a variety of accessibility reasons. Word documents are fine. Word documents and assisted readers tend to get along really well. But if you are going to include a study guide, make sure it's the right kind of document. If you are putting a recording on YouTube and then embedding it into Blackboard, which is great, I do that. I think it's fantastic. You have to check and make sure the captions are correct. We need to make sure that we are meeting those accessibility standards because our students need it and they deserve it. But in your other resources too, think about how students are how they've been learning in your classes and how they're going to be using this material. I would also say this applies to your communication as well. Simply dropping something like a study guide into Blackboard should really only be step 1. You should email your students about that resource. You should publicize it in class as much as you possibly can. You want to make sure to reach as many people as possible. You want to consider your pace too. So touching base with your students does more than just take the temperature of the course progress. It shows that you care. If your students express that they're struggling or need more time on an assignment, consider the pace of the course. Is it set up to account for students' differing levels of readiness for the course material? So if we're looking at students with differing levels of readiness, I am again talking about plural students. If one student asks for an extension, you probably don't need to change the pace of the course. But if half or 3/4 of the class is saying, hey, this is moving a little fast, can I have like half a week? Maybe it's time to look into assessment. You'll learn all about assessment in one of the following modules here in the New Faculty Academy. And a huge part of assessment is just what's working, what's not working, how do we fix what's not working, and then we progress from there. When I first started teaching, I think I approached English classes as if I were teaching English majors, and that's not the case. Especially here at a community college, we don't have an English major. When I am teaching English, I am teaching English for welders or future paralegals, or people that maybe intend to transfer to a different institution, but they intend to do it for biology or something. Very infrequently do we get a future creative writing major, which sure is a little bit of a bummer for me, but that's fine. I cannot approach my English classes as if they are for English majors. It would move way too quickly, and it would be incredibly unfair to the students that are in that class that have to take it that do not have the pre-existing skills that an English major would have, having had all of those other classes. So my pace needs to be aligned with the students that I have at Mount West. So typically, a given module for me is 4 to 5 weeks in length, sometimes 6 if we're looking at a later module. That 6th week is usually like spring break or fall break. So that's, students can work over fall break if they want to. I encourage them not to, but they can. That's where that 6 week tends to come from. So I'm not looking to get through an entire module in 1 week. I'm just not, because I know that pace is just not going to work with the students that I've had previously. So if you notice people are struggling to keep up, you've got a couple different options, but adjusting your pace is one of them. Offering review sessions is another really good one. I've done that before for my E students. So we have 101E for English courses and also for math courses, where we have enhanced courses, and an hour of that is hybrid, so it's online. But hybrid doesn't mean online, by the way. The course is hybrid. The online work is done asynchronously. But if I notice that students aren't doing well or they're falling behind, I offer review sessions. So that can help with your pace too. But you do need to be cognizant of how quickly you're moving and how it affects your students. And then finally on the screen, we have demonstrated learning. Exams are awesome. Well, I said no student ever. I think essays are great. I always thought essays were great whenever I was a student, but I doubt everybody says essays are great. But what I am saying is that exams work really well to determine student learning, but they're not the only way for students to demonstrate knowledge. And we should, again, consider they're preparing for the workforce. They're probably not going to be taking exams when they're on the job. Some might. I'm not saying they won't, but some is not all. So we want to consider other assignments like portfolios, where they're able to demonstrate a variety of different things. Group presentations, if they are moving into a field where group work is something that is consistent, where they're going to need to be able to present, maybe consider that as an option. Demos, so having them do a how-to assignment where they actually have to demo something. Video essays are on the rise, and I love that. That's super exciting. Or, if relevant, creative or technical writing. Even though this is not an institution with a creative writing major, do still give my students an opportunity to do radical revisions of their projects. They just have to maintain the same general idea of their previous project. So all that research, everything they learned, it's still there. So when they write a song or design or compose several poems or write a short story, it still has to be about the same thing. And it is a really good way for a student to prove they understood what they researched. One thing I want to note too is, and you'll hear this if you are involved in our AQ cohorts, but even if you're not, there is going to be a focus on authentic assessments. Authentic assessments are assignments that are reflective of what these students would be doing on the job. So designing an authentic assessment, maybe if you have some experience with the career fields associated with your program, with the course that you are teaching, designing assignments that are less geared towards tradition, your exams and essays, and more towards what students will be doing on the job is, or can be rather, much more effective. Again, I'm not saying exams and essays don't work well. They do. I love essays, but they're not the only way for students to demonstrate learning, and sometimes different assignments mesh with different student groups. Now, when we talk about building community, which I've stressed a couple different times, you'll find that as you continue to focus on student engagement, you will also start to foster a sense of community within your classroom. And we can continue to foster this in relation to our different students with different backgrounds in a variety of different ways. The first being, encourage students to speak with one another. This can be rough in the beginning. Sometimes it's a little bit difficult, but assigning small group activities that allow them to do a think, pair, share, getting their thoughts out there, bonding, as it were, that helps a lot. As someone who, again, where I'm talking about writing is very vulnerable. Students don't like to share their work. Sometimes they don't even like to talk about writing because so much of it feels subjective. When I get to have conversations with them where I give them these big questions, like what makes a good story or what makes a story complex, these are tough, I would argue kind of dumb questions because of how inherently subjective they they are, but they do get my students towards where I want them to be in terms of looking at their writing and approaching the narratives that they put together in the first module. So I ask them the questions, they think about it, and then I put them together and I have them discuss before then coming back to me. Again, they're working with the same question, but they're coming to each other with different opinions and different experiences, and starting there, doing that early, is much better than waiting until week 7, 8, and then being like, okay, we're doing group work now. They're not accustomed to that. It might be harder to get them to get into the groove of it. So when we're talking about encouraging students to speak with one another, one, you need to be a part of that conversation. It can't just be a think, pair, share, and they don't share back with you and you don't engage. You need to be part of that conversation. You got to be part of that group. But doing that early is absolutely the way to go. I am so sorry. We keep having these. There was the phone call that I hopefully edited most of it out, the ringing rather, and now I have an email chime. So ignore that, please. Next is stress that their different backgrounds and experiences make the learning environment and thus your discussions more vibrant and nuanced. So, for example, when I'm teaching argument and I have students from very different backgrounds or very different views and they're butting heads, I stress the importance of that and how that is connected to our conversations about dialogue and about research being used to support the points that we are making. I'm not getting in there with the assumption that I'm going to get them on the same page. That's probably not going to happen. Instead, I, one, stress that the classroom is designed to be a space where folks can share their work and not, feel as if somebody's going to get upset with them. To a degree. Sometimes people are a little emotional about things that we talk about, and that's okay too. I stress that emotions are valid. But I also stress that this is where we get nuance and different shades of gray and different approaches to subject matters, and students tend to appreciate that. And also stressing too that those different approaches are protected in the classroom. People do not have to have the same thoughts. And then finally, ask students to elaborate on their experiences when they're connected to course topics. One thing that, and I tell my students this too, when I was a student and someone would raise their hand to be like, hey teacher, this reminds me of this thing that happened to me this one time, I would get annoyed. I didn't like that. But it's actually great that students do that. And I see that now as an instructor because they're connecting what they're talking about, what they're learning in the classroom to lived experiences, thus making sure to stress that what they're learning doesn't exist in a vacuum. If you notice a student doing that, ask them to elaborate. Ask if anybody else has a similar experience or a similar situation. That can help to build that community. And again, bring your work outside of the vacuum. That way, your students are talking about the fact that what they're learning will continue to be applicable. They're not just in your class because they have to be. They're there because it's important. And finally, workforce readiness. So it's more important now than ever, really, that community college students receive instruction that is directly tied to career readiness. I'm not going to say this isn't important at the university level. It is. It's important for all collegiate institutions, but it's especially important for community colleges. So here are some things I want you to keep in mind. Think about how your course outcomes lead to career success. If I am looking at the outcomes for English 101, are students going to be tasked with writing a thesis statement or a document supported by a thesis statement when they are on the job? Probably not. But I do have specific outcomes that can be exemplified in an essay that will be important for them in terms of career readiness, really focusing on things like formatting, focusing on things like what's happening at the sentence level. So are they working with standard academic English? And then, arguably the most important, using research, rationale, critical thinking to be able to come to some kind of conclusion. So I stress all the time that those are skills that you have to succeed in your given career, regardless of what it is. So it's very important to connect your course outcomes, whatever's going on in your class, to career readiness. We also want to consider as well the assignments that we're putting together and how they align with the college mission. So as of recording this video, the Mount West mission statement talks about how we prepare students to lead in the community, to learn and lead in the community. So when you're thinking about your assignments at the community college level, it wouldn't be great for me in English 101 to have 3 of the 4 of my assignments be creative assignments, even though I love creative writing. And that's what I'm trained to what I was trained to do. The assignments need to align with the college mission. You need to make sure that what you are doing in that classroom is preparing them for once they go out into the community. So sometimes that means not picking the assignment that's super fun that you want to do, and instead designing a new one that is more appropriate and indicative of the course outcomes and what it is students are expecting. And then finally, recommendation or reference availability. There will be students that you have in your classroom who don't have any prior work experience. You might be asked to be a reference for an interview. I've gotten that several times. I've written tons of letters of recommendation. This is something that students will expect from you. So be prepared to do that. That is one thing that kind of helps them get their foot in the door when it comes to career readiness, and it is good of us to support them as best we can. It's not here on the screen, but I do also want to stress as well, the Writing Center tends to help out with a lot of career services things, so you can have students go there to get feedback on things like their resume, their CV, cover letter, letter of intent, etc. So if you can promote the Writing Center, also great. Thank you so much for your time. I thoroughly appreciate it. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, by all means, let me know. You can send me an email at No. Oh my goodness. You can send me an email at cetl@mctc.edu. Oh my goodness. I hope you have a great rest of your day. See you in the next one.